Hey, Rockheads, this is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
Here to announce the NDC Sydney Conference, September 17th through 21st.
Go to ndcsydney.com to register.
Tell them Carl and Richard sent ya. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
We're getting ready for some fall conferences here, notably Dev Intersection and all that goes with it.
It's really fall this time. It's December. So
yeah,
very fall.
Are you still calling it fall, though?
Well, it's technically our fall show. It's in Vegas, you know.
It's going to be fall in Vegas in December.
Because of certain Microsoft teams, they asked us to push it down a bit, and so we did. It's the first week of December. It's like your last fun thing before you really started getting into Christmas break is go hang in Vegas where it's warm.
Right. Absolutely. Well, it's going to be a fun time. And SQL intersection as well, right?
Yeah. I do a plug on Run Ads Radio for SQL Intersection because at every one of these shows twice a year, I do a SQL Q&A for an hour with Kim and Paul and a bunch of the other SQL speakers, and we have a whole bunch of attendees. I really like them as someone who cares a lot about data storage and stuff because they give you sort of a state of affairs.
Right. Like
I have gone back and listened to a few old ones. It's like people are worrying about different things as time goes on.
Yeah.
The complexity of data storage, like not just storing everything in a relational database, that seems to have basically gone mainstream now.
Yeah.
We're going to have some Mongo. We're going to have, some other data storage mechanism. And of course, the conversation around the cloud is a constant thing now.
Well, it's fortuitous that we were talking about that. And it is no accident either, because what I've got for Better Know Framework fits right in with this conversation.
Oh.
So roll the music.
All right, dude. What do you got?
SQLfiddle.com.
Okay. Well, my mom told me if I fiddled with my SQL, I'd go blind. So,
well, you know what Fiddler is. And this is like Fiddler for SQL.
Interesting. So, like intercepting SQL communication?
No. It's just you just have a place where you can create tables and run any kind of T-SQL against them and mess around with it, and then when you're done, it just goes away. Or you can save your fiddles and all of that stuff.
All right, and it's and it's got a choice of what SQL server do you want to use. So
that's right.
Defaults to MySQL, but you also got a couple of flavors of Postgres.
Yeah.
And Microsoft SQL Server 2017 and Oracle 11G. So look at that.
And what I love about this is that, let's say that you want to save some money and you don't want to have to fire up a new version of SQL Azure or get a SQL Server going. You just go here with your browser, mess around with some stuff, and, Bob's your uncle.
Sure. No, that's very cool, dude.
Yeah.
It's a place to hack, a place to experiment.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to learn some SQL things, if you're trying to figure out how joins are done or how to do foreign keys and stuff like that. It's the stuff that, non-mere mortals do.
Well, I also, the fact that I could switch between different flavors is like, hey, this is how it runs on SQL Server. What does this look like in Oracle? And see how it would behave. So that's interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah, neat.
Thought you'd like that one.
Absolutely.
So who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1441, which we did back in May of 2017 with one John Papa.
Never heard of him.
Talking about Enterprise Angular and Azure, which I also think where we first talked about Angular Mix as well. And this particular comment, and this is going to be embarrassing for John, so I like it even more, comes from Mark, who says, fantastic show, guys. And let me be the first to say that John has done amazing things for the Angular community. Yeah. As one of those community members, I say a big thank you. This show really struck a chord with me as I'm currently leading a front-end team building Enterprise Angular version 4 multi-tenant, multi-region application with .NET Core on the back end and everything hosted in Azure. John is 100% right about how the Angular CLI has removed the friction and ceremony of starting an Angular app.
Yep.
We've also found it a great tool to standardize components, service, and module creation, much like .NET Core scaffolds up your web API stuff. It also has awesome features like importing your newly created component into the closest module that can trip up a new NG developers, and I've been there and done that.
Yep.
John also mentions Angular Language Service Extension for VS Code. This is a brilliant tool which not only provides binding in HTML templates, but will also highlight errors in your template and components prior to running ng-serve and having it blow up in the browser console or your terminal window, as opposed to after you deploy. We're a full 4 months into development, admittedly this was a year ago, and really enjoying the experience thus far, and I feel personally that it is a great platform to develop complex enterprise front ends on. John, if you're ever in Australia and on the Gold Coast, which is Australia's version of Miami, I'm sure I owe you many beers for all the Angular wisdom bombs you have shared on Pluralsight and adventures in Angular. Thank you, Obi-Wan. The Angular is now strong in this one. It's a good one, huh?
Yeah.
I couldn't read it without John listening in because, you got to embarrass it to some degree. But hey, he made it different for someone, for Mark here. And Mark, thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or via any of your social media because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
Absolutely. And definitely follow us on Twitter. He's at Rich Campbell. I'm at Carl Franklin. Send us a tweet. We select star from tweets where praise equals true.
Nice. Are we supposed to use machine learning and do sentiment analysis around that?
I don't know. It's just a joke, all right? Okay, maybe it wasn't a joke.
Just a joke.
All right, here comes John Papa. He's a principal developer advocate with Microsoft, and he's passionate about web and mobile technologies. He often enjoys speaking around the world, is co-host of the popular Adventures in Angular podcast, author of the Angular Style Guide, and many popular Pluralsight courses. You can reach John at johnpapa.net or on Twitter at John_Papa. Welcome back, John.
Hey guys, good to see you again, or hear you again.
Yeah, good to hear you too. Although I am looking at your Skype photo, which is you dressed up as Ward Bell, dressed up as Liberace.
Yes, pretty much.
I don't even know what to say about that. I have never once compared Ward Bell to Liberace. I've compared him to many things, but that would not be one of them.
No, it's actually not. It's more like Liberace's pimp limo driver or something with a fur coat.
What other kind of limo driver would Liberace have?
Maybe we can get that photo and put it on the page afterwards.
Oh, let's do that.
We'll use it as your bio photo.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not my standard bio photo. I've just never changed that in Skype, and maybe I should, but it's become kind of a running joke now.
Yeah.
The man died in 1987. So we are talking about somebody who's been dead for more than 20 years. Like,
hey, we're old.
People. Yeah, I guess we're old. There you go.
Yeah, we're old. Sorry.
Yeah, that's no news flash. Uh-oh.
No.
Well, I'll give you my favorite quote of Liberace's, the best quote, and you've used it, not known it was attributed to him.
I wish my brother George were here.
Not that one. That is his also. No, he's also the guy who first said, I was crying all the way to the bank.
Oh, right.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah, when they were complaining about how campy his show was and all that sort of thing. The critics were always, he was a pianist, right? And put on quite a show. And the critics were saying how campy the show was. He says, I cried all the way to the bank.
Yeah, yeah.
Good problems to have, huh?
Morebling.com. Yeah. So you getting excited for angle brackets down at Dev Intersection there this December?
I am. I'm looking forward to the fall. I'm actually taking off all of July and August without speaking or doing any kind of conferences at all. So I'm looking forward to that first, but then I kick it into gear again in the fall. So awesome. It's good to take a break once in a while and kind of refresh, do some hardcore coding and, build some awesome stuff. So there's always fresh material and it's always good to be able to put your code behind your speaking so you can show real stuff.
Yeah, and we've got the two big shows. So we've got Angular Mix, October 10 to 12. Which is John's baby, let's be clear.
Yeah.
And, definitely the heart and soul behind the thing. And spectacular lineup with that, including Mr. Brad Green coming back again. And then, of course, Dev Intersection we talked about earlier, which is December 3rd to 6th.
Yeah. So we were talking to Glenn Block about Extend, and which is a node-based SaaS solution. And I was thinking about, differences between just firing up Node on Azure or anywhere else for that matter. And it's kind of funny now we're talking about Node on Azure. Have you seen that stuff that he's doing?
I haven't tried it. I've heard about it, but I have not tried it yet. So more just a passing knowledge at this point.
Yeah. So what's new in Node Azure land?
I'll tell you, anything, if you look at Node in the cloud in general, it seems like that's become the new, here's something out this week kind of story.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. And honestly, it's changed so much just in the year and a half I've been back at Microsoft here. When I got in here, a lot of these services we have today either didn't exist or they were just about to come out. Now, there's so many ways you can launch Node on Azure. It's kind of, in some ways, it's fascinating. In other ways, it's almost overwhelming because you're like, I just want to get my app up in the cloud. So what's the right way? What's the recommended way for me is a question we get a lot.
So what is the right way? Wait. I know the answer. It depends.
It depends. Yes.
It depends.
I
told you we're old. We're talking about depends now.
Oh, no.
Jeez.
I see new sponsors in your future.
I see them all.
Brought to you by Metamucil.
Used to be Geritol. Now it's like Ensure.
Well, once you get enough fiber in your diet, the next step is to kind of figure out what you mean by deploy your app to the cloud. And if you ask a bunch of Node developers, it's I think the answer they give you will be different. Some people like to deploy with like a CLI tool where it's like a one-step, like this great tool called Now. Netlify has got one. Surge is another one. There's about a dozen others too, where you literally just go to a folder in your terminal or your command prompt and just say Now or whatever the command might be for that tool.
Yeah. And
it looks at what you've got in your package JSON, figures out the dependencies, wraps up all your code, and sends it up to a cloud server. And within, a minute, maybe even seconds in some cases, you've got a cloud server running with a URL.
That's great. There's more and more of these things coming out, sort of infrastructure button push things. Yeah.
And Azure has one of those now too, where we've been working with the app services team, and it's all them. It's not, I say we, but it's really all them. They have created I don't know what the right word for it is, so I'll just use my words. It's like a shortcut for the CLI where you can type in AZ web app up. So Azure is AZ, that's a CLI. Web app is what you're creating because you could be creating, one of 100 different services. And then the next command is up. And that will basically do what I just said. It'll take your app, your node packages, et cetera, and put them up in a cloud inside of Azure and give you a URL. And then if from that point you can go play with it through VS Code or through the Azure portal or whatever your favorite is. That's one of the most fascinating and interesting ways to deploy to the cloud these days that I see in Azure. And I've been really enjoying that side.
Now, Azure CLI is a NPM product deployment, or is it all GitHub now? Where do you get Azure CLI from?
Yeah, so there's a great webpage, and I can put them in the show notes if that's helpful, on how to get the Azure CLI. Basically, there's a couple things you have to install to get that. Once you have the Azure CLI, there's an extension that you can add to it, which adds in the web app up features. So the Azure CLI itself is like its own platform that you can install and then run it on Windows or Linux or Mac or whatever you want to do. And then you add in this small extension for AZ Web App Up. And really what AZ Web App Up is doing is it's saying, hey, instead of making you, for those familiar with Azure, you can define and configure the heck out of everything. So you can say, I want this size server with this many CPUs and this kind of a pricing plan.
Right.
I want to put it in India or Northern Europe or Western US. You can define all these things. AZ Web App Up just says, I'll do that later. You just put that up in the cloud for now. Let me just see this thing running.
Right.
So you don't have to pass all those flags in.
Right.
But it doesn't limit you either.
So the main thing is you're just giving it access to your Azure credentials so it can throw the site up there.
Yeah. Which is super useful this is not a full CI process, right? But there's a development cycle we all go through where sometimes we just want to see the thing up there first.
Right.
To see what's happening.
Give me my hello world ASP.NET page, right? Like that same sort of effect.
Yeah, honestly, the first thing I do, I love CI and I use CI a lot, especially in large enterprises I've worked with. But my first mode is not, let me go and make sure I've got all my branches right, my branching strategy, my versions in GitHub, my CI tools, my unit testing, my end-to-end, and then let's figure out where I'm going to put it in Azure and all the different settings. Honestly, the first thing I do is say, let's see if I throw spaghetti in the wall, if this thing's going to stick. And that's what this kind of a tool is great at. And it doesn't stop you there either. You can then migrate and then grow into the rest of it. So I like this as a great first step into using Node on Azure.
Sounds good.
Do we need to sort of talk about the fundamentals of Node a bit? Because I think anybody coming at this from an IIS perspective, like it's almost the anathema of the Swiss Army knife that is IIS.
Yeah, that's a good point, Richard. There's some basic things about Node that I think really help define what the problem statements are for getting to the cloud or for just developing or deploying these apps. First itself, Node, when you run it as a web server, a lot of people use Express. It's by far the most used package out there, at least it's been for years, that you can use. And Express effectively adds in the web server aspect that you can use with Node. So a lot of people run Node with Express to launch itself. But the way Node works is you've got all these middleware packages that you can pull in to add features. So like IIS, we'll use that example since you mentioned it. It's a web server that kind of comes with all these features built in.
Right.
And then with Node, you only get what you ask for. So you're not getting security and logging and the ability to serve JSON and HTML and all the stuff or consume it JSON out of the box. You pull in middleware and you tell it how to behave. The nice side about that is you're never getting extra stuff that you're not familiar with. Mm-hmm. The downside is you have to make sure you know what you're asking for.
Sure.
This is also the way ASP.NET Core is kind of going over the last couple of years too. Just pull in what you need with middleware.
Yeah, it's sort of this off by default mentality as opposed to on by default mentality. But now you have to know what you're asking for.
Yeah, and when you do that, the challenge comes in, and you think about ASP.NET with NuGet, Node we have NPM, which are just packages. You have to make sure when you deploy to the cloud that the packages that you want are deployed to the cloud as well.
Yeah. And
one of the struggles is, okay, let's say you put together an application with Node.js and using whatever on the front end is fine. I can speak pure HTML even. If you do that and you have a bunch of packages, do you want your packages to be zipped up on your local machine and sent to the cloud? Or would you prefer that the cloud actually installs the NPM packages up there instead? Mm-hmm. And to kind of answer that, I think you then have to think about, well, what's the consequences of both ways? If you take it locally and you zip it up and you bring it up to the cloud, some packages actually are operating system dependent. And some of them also, how do you know the version of Node and NPM that are running in the cloud are also the same versions of Node and the package manager running in your machine?
Right. You do have some control over that, though, right, in Azure?
Yeah, you do. You can say basically, look, this is the version I've got here. Let's go ahead and set that up in Azure. Right. But what if you've got a team now? And Richard's got Windows and you've got Debian Linux and I've got Mac.
Yeah.
You just don't know what's going to be there. So another option is to just say, you know what, let the cloud do that for you. So you're not worrying about these kind of things.
When you link to other things that are running in the cloud, of course, now you have dependencies that may or may not change, right? I mean, it's the same with JavaScript everywhere. If you're linking to something that exists on another domain, you're susceptible to whatever happens over there.
Yeah, you really want to control your dependencies is really the story of it, right? Knowing what those look like. And it's just good to, I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just trying to say that this is things you have to think about when you're deploying any app, whether it's ASP.NET or Node.
Sure.
Or whatever.
But I mean, what I appreciate, not that I'm a Node fan, right? Like JavaScript has never been my first language of choice. I would really rather code in C#. But what I like about Node's philosophy is this configuration as code mindset, that everything is explicitly turned on. Like you talk about that cross-platform problem. It's like the list that you make to make a Node app work is the same problem on every platform, so they can see what needs to be in place. There's no secrets.
Yeah, it's really like a grocery list. You create your package JSON file, which tells you what the dependencies are, and there's even developer and versus runtime dependencies. You can even specify in there your Node platform version, your NPM version, things like that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That way, when you give it to an Azure, it can say, we can inspect that kind of stuff and say, this is what you want. I'll go ahead and put them there.
Yeah, this is a manifest of everything you're going to need.
Yep. That's the same thing that happens with a lot of the cloud providers. When you let's say you're not going straight from your desktop to the cloud, and you want to have at least a little bit more control, like you push to GitHub, and whenever you go to the master branch, perhaps, that's when the master branch will kick off a Git hook over in Azure, and then it'll grab that stuff and run npm install for you. So you're still getting the same thing. It still has to get those packages, those dependencies, regardless if you go direct from your local machine or through GitHub, or if you go through CI, then you got a lot more control over how that happens too.
Right.
Hey, John, hold that thought for just a minute while we take a moment for this very important message. This episode of .NET Rocks is brought to you by Datadog, a SaaS monitoring platform for cloud infrastructure, applications, and logs. Datadog gives you total visibility into application performance for Node.js, Java, Python, and more. And it integrates seamlessly with more than 200 infrastructure technologies, including Microsoft Azure and other cloud providers. With sophisticated alerting, distributed tracing, and log management, Datadog helps you get a handle on the performance of all your applications and infrastructure. Start a free 14-day trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit dd.netrocks.com to get started. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. Carl Franklin here, Richard Campbell there, and John Papa down there in Florida. And hey, you can run Azure Functions JavaScript. There's a JavaScript experience for Azure Functions. Why would you do that over running Node?
Why would I do it over running Node? That's a great question. So Azure Functions is the Azure product name for serverless technology.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people know the words like Lambda is one of the earliest versions of that, which came out of AWS, Amazon's products.
Yeah.
And the idea is this. You just want to write a function that does something. Maybe it's connecting two apps together. Maybe it's just a simple HTTP function where, you're asking for data from somewhere. Maybe it's an IoT connector, which connects some IoT device to something else. And you don't want to go ahead and set up a server, the infrastructure, the operating system, decide if it's IIS or Node, and then set up like a web API or Node with Express. Think about ASP.NET or Node. There's a lot of stuff you have to do before you even write the code that says, hey, I just wanted a list of customers. Function says, we'll set up all that for you. You just write the function.
Right.
Yeah.
And so is it so much Node then than it is just programming functions in JavaScript?
Mostly, yeah. It's really more JavaScript. Although it's truly Node because you can pull in NPM packages if you want to into that, because you may want to do it. But you don't have to set up the web server in this case. It's just, let me write my functions and my APIs, and there's security and there's ways you can tap into databases from it. And so there's some really cool things you can do, but it allows you to focus less on the infrastructure and the platform. And it only bills you if you do a consumption model based on what you use. And it can scale up or scale down dynamically that way too.
John, it sounds like Bela Lugosi just came for dinner at your place.
Yeah, you heard that, didn't you?
Thunderclap, yeah.
Life in Florida, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, the afternoons in Florida.
We didn't want to startle anybody. So what are the other ways that we can use, that we can deploy Node on Azure?
I think one of the more interesting ones that I've really started enjoying is using Docker. And there's a couple of reasons I go this way. Let me kind of explain the problem it solves for me first. I wasn't a big Docker fan for a while, and it wasn't so much I didn't like it as I just didn't really understand where I wanted to use it or where it was adding value to me. It was solving problems that I wasn't necessarily personally having at the time. So I learned how to use it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And it kind of just popped in the back of my mind. And then more and more I started seeing that apps I was deploying were running into these issues where the version of NPM on the cloud server was different than the one on my local machine or the CI server.
Huh.
And it's just like, this works on my machine stuff is getting old. I've been doing it for 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Been there.
And Docker just became so easy to say, hold on a sec. I literally just handed, and this is a moment of revelation for me, I handed my CI team a piece of paper. It was actually a doc. That said, here are the 7 steps to install this app. And then I thought about this for a second. I'm like, that could be a Docker file. Why can't I just say, use this OS, with this version of Node, this version of NPM, run these commands to NPM install and crank up my server, copy the files over. And that's what I was telling them to do. I'm like, why am I doing this that way? Which is still error prone because honestly, a lot of times the CI team would call me up and go, hey, all the teams are complaining is such and such broke. Why'd it break, John? We didn't change anything. And then I go look with them. Turns out that somebody upgraded Node somewhere or upgraded NPM or,
right.
This way with Docker, none of that matters. You just tell it, in my container, this is what it is. And it just always works all the time. And there's no more of that.
So the big thing with containers is that version protection.
Yes.
That the versions of things in the container are specific to the container. You're not thinking in context of a machine.
Exactly. And it sounds so simple and like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But until you've gone through this and had these kind of problems, like the place I used to work, literally this happened a dozen times until we kind of went down this road with Docker because we had to get Docker into our CI process. But
right.
There's nothing like having 50 teams call you up and say, hey, all of our stuff's broken. What'd you do?
Yeah, and we blame you.
Yeah.
Well, then the argument goes too of, what about just the single developer shop or the 5-person shop? Is Docker useful there? And yeah, I mean, you have the same problem. Why would you want to even deal with it? Docker has gotten so simple now to simply create a container with a Docker file that it just makes sense to use that, whether you're a 1-person shop or you're a 1,000-person shop.
The IT guy in me looks at the container situation these days and says, why aren't we running all software on the desktop in containers? Like, when does that suddenly become the client technology? Because I'm tired of battling interactions between apps on desktops.
Yeah, it really is an interesting story. And I think what really made Docker easy in a lot of ways was, the Docker files now, when you use tools like VS Code, wherever you're deploying your Docker file, whether it's locally in your machine or somewhere else, into a cloud or CI system, tools like VS Code will let you generate the Docker files for you. They'll actually intelligently configure it. You tell them whether it's Node or Go or .NET, and then it'll help you build them and then run them and debug them locally, and then even push them up to like Docker Hub or Azure's container registry for you. So you could do everything right from a tool like VS Code, which to me made life so easy.
And you were just talking about functions too, because I think that sort of two new hotnesses in working in cloud are the container approach and the serverless approach.
Yeah, I agree.
So, how do you pick between those?
Well, I don't think you have to pick either. That's where I think you can build your containers, just picking some technology. Let's say your app, thinking tangibly, you've got an app written in Vue or Angular, React, whatever
Sure.
your favorite framework is. And you're serving that through something like a Node Express server. You could build a container that does that and do all that with Docker, and then push that up through VS Code up to like the Azure Container Registry, which is behind a sign-in. And then you could deploy that to one or more app services or if you want. And if you really want to go crazy, you can use Kubernetes and stuff, but you don't have to.
Right.
And then what if that app wants to talk to a bunch of APIs or connect to, maybe in your back end, you've got a SQL server and an Oracle database and a MySQL one, maybe a Cosmos DB one. And all of these are required for running the app. Maybe instead of writing all that code in Express inside your container, you could create serverless functions, which then aggregate and handle all the database interactions.
Nice.
And then access that from your Docker container from up inside of Azure.
That's a great insight, John. I really appreciate that, especially, because the container stuff is quite platform agnostic, right? I could be running that over on AWS, so forth. But if I'm using Cosmos on the back end, I know I'm running that in Azure. So writing Azure functions to do the Cosmos calls makes total sense to me.
Right.
It's platform bound. That's not a bad thing. You wanted that capability. And the pieces that may run in other places, other configurations, they can live in container.
Yeah, and you can still write functions that talk to third-party services too. So it just allows you to have one place to put all your APIs, for example. And I'm only talking functions as APIs here because you can do other things with functions too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I've also seen, like if you go to the Azure portal now, there's a new button in there. I'm forgetting the exact name of it. I should know this. But there's a new button when you create functions about using Docker with functions as well, which allows you to create your own containers of functions.
Containers of functions. I like it.
There's new ways to do everything, just as you thought you understood the surface.
Well, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time to listen in on Marlon Brando writing code in the afterlife. I could have been a container.
Oh, no, jeez. Oh, no.
What? He lives in the cloud, you know? He's
true.
up
He
there.
does.
In the clouds. All right.
Because he's dead.
Right. That's why it's not funny.
It could have been a container.
Could have been a container. It's actually time to give away a $200 Amazon card to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club, compliments of Progress Telerik. But first, let me tell you about Conversational UI from Progress Telerik and Kendo UI. Conversational UI are chatbot framework agnostic user interface controls and components that enable .NET and JavaScript developers to create modern conversational chatbot experiences in their web, mobile, and desktop applications. The industry's first packaged set of user interface components built specifically for chatbots is available as part of the company's Telerik, ASP.NET Ajax, ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, WinForms, WPF, Xamarin products, and Kendo UI for jQuery, Angular, Vue, React, PHP, and JSP libraries. By implementing key UI design features such as calendars, date pickers, list views, and others that are included in the toolsets, developers will be able to improve chatbot conversation through visual elements that enhance the natural flow of conversation. For more information, visit telerik.com/conversational-UI.
Well, all right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is James Doran.
Congratulations, James.
Duran.
Nice.
One of those.
Now, here's some clappers.
Duran. And just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club, James gets that $200 Amazon card courtesy of Progress Telerik. And if you'd like to join the fan club, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and you'll be a member. We have thousands of members all over the world, and every show we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the fan club. But you have to sign up to win. And also, it's our guest's turn now. John, if you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
Does it have to stay within the $5,000?
Hey, I mean, if you want to win from us, I suppose. But
you're not the first person to say I put a deposit down on a Tesla.
Or buy a mirror,
A mirror?
A tire of a Tesla.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking like a mirror, like in your bathroom.
No. Rear view mirror.
Wow.
Yeah.
Geez. I don't know. I've got pretty much everything I want and need. Maybe I would give that to start up some kind of to one of these great diversity and inclusion groups that are out there for helping kind of ramp up getting new people into our technology.
Awesome.
Nice.
That's a great way to spend $5,000.
The cloud developer advocates are quite a diverse bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's, I don't know what the exact numbers are because I don't track that kind of stuff, but we are from all walks of life, cultures, backgrounds, and technologies.
Very cool.
It's cool. It's working, I think. I think there's been a lot more effort in general with folks to do a better job of making sure you get those different viewpoints, just the way that people think differently and come at problems differently.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, obviously, me being on the team, I think it's working, and I'm biased on that. But a great example, I was thinking the other day, we were talking with some folks, and we were thinking about, hey, we want to make sure that everybody's using this thing in Azure, and how we understand how they're using it and what their problems are. And one of the things we all did is we kind of stepped back and said, we really want to know how this is working outside of our bubble. Everybody lives in a bubble.
Sure.
I live in the JavaScript world bubble, for example. And, there's people who live in their own technology bubbles or their own cultural based on where they live in the world or just the people that they talk to or even on Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to get out of those bubbles. And I think that's one of the most fun parts of this job is really trying to step back and go, okay, maybe I'm only seeing it being used this way. Like the ways I talked about Azure with Node today with Docker or Direct Deploy or GitHub or CI. But there's other people using it in other ways, and really going out and listening and observing. That's the most fun part of our job, and bringing it back in.
Visual Studio Code has support for Node debugging, doesn't it?
It does, and it's fantastic. It's so nice because I remember 6 years ago using Node and having to crank up a Node debugger through terminal.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, just today it's light years ahead. Now you just press a button and it's debugging, and you set breakpoints, and so much easier.
And has anybody got JavaScript debugging working in Visual Studio proper?
I know it's working. I don't use Visual Studio much anymore.
I know it works. It's just, it seems to be jumping through some hoops just to get that working, in my experience anyway.
They tried a few times. You know, that's the big thing. It's like there were a few stabs at how to make that work well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that, but because I don't use Visual Studio much anymore.
Right.
Not because I don't like it, but because I use a Mac purely. So
You're in that bubble.
Right.
yeah, that's my bubble. My bubble is I live in a Mac, and I live in VS Code.
You're living in the Electron bubble, which is interesting. You know, now that GitHub has been bought by Microsoft, you know, I don't think a whole lot's going to happen on the source control side, but what happens to Electron is an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's be curious to see. I know Nat is he's leading up that area. He'd be a good person to get on your show. Talk more about that.
I couldn't think of a better guy. When I heard it was going to be Nat at GitHub, I'm like, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll happen.
Yeah. Well, we got Phil Hack on right away because everybody loves Phil. Poor Nat. I mean, the guy's plate is so full. I'm loath to grab him. I wanted to give him a few months to get his feet under him and then bring him on the show to say, okay, what are you doing?
Yeah, and he's all about do the right thing. So I have a lot of confidence this is gonna work really well.
His Ask Me Anything on Reddit was phenomenal. Just like it read so well. Yeah, good thinking all around. I have nothing bad to say about that other than maybe it should have been done the first day. But he got there and they did the right things. No question.
Yeah, it kind of it took a lot of us by surprise too that whole thing went down. I mean, very happy about it, but
yeah,
it was interesting to see people's reactions too on the internet.
Yeah, well, it did leak. So, you know, the storm sort of the weekend before the announcement was interesting.
Yeah,
people were all over them. There's people who still think old Microsoft, and people who knew about the new Microsoft are looking at those guys going, "Have you not been paying attention?"
Yeah, it's somebody said the other day, and I don't have the stats to prove it, so take it with a grain of salt, but that the number 1 and 2 open source projects are now Microsoft with GitHub and VS Code once this deal closes. So that's kind of interesting too.
It's very interesting. I wonder how many people's repulsion towards JavaScript is simply old battle scars of old versions of JavaScript. And it always helps to go and look at Node code and say, hey, we're not living in a DOM here. The language looks very different when you're not thinking in DOM in JavaScript.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very different because Node is not like browser development, right?
Right.
There is no DOM. I mean, you can have one. I mean, you can have whatever you want, anything.
Sure. But you can have it's your foot, right? Take every bad idea you want. You can make it happen. JavaScript is here to hurt you.
Yeah, that's true.
TypeScript makes it a little more bearable, I find. I want to go back to VS Code for a little bit too, because this is not my bubble. I'm a Visual Studio developer, but I also do JavaScript. So tell me some more about the Node features in VS Code. Well,
one of the greatest pieces about VS Code is the extensibility model. So there's this great marketplace with 5,000 or 6,000 extensions now that you can add into VS Code. And the whole model of VS Code is they want to keep it light and fast. So they're not pulling everything in.
Yeah.
The intent of this was not to make another Visual Studio for Mac. That's a different model, right?
Right.
Visual Studio does everything for you, and it's great at that. Visual Studio Code is we're lightweight, we're fast, we're an editor, and then these extensions pull in features. So there's a team at Microsoft working with various people, Chris Diaz, Matt Hernandez, a bunch of other great people who are building these extensions that allow VS Code to kind of pull in a little bit of what you're used to in Visual Studio, Carl. Like, I want to deploy an Azure function, or I want to create an Azure function locally in my machine, scaffold a project, run it locally, and debug it locally, and then deploy it to Azure and debug it without ever leaving VS Code. So there's some really cool
sounds like
extensions
Visual
that do
Studio.
Right.
Yeah, and it's bringing a little bit of those tasteful integrations, and it's by choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you get to decide. So they have one for functions. They have one for Docker, which I love because it makes. I used to memorize Docker commands in the CLI, and now I just use the VS Code menus basically with my keyboard to pull them in. You can also right-click. That works too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's one for Cosmos DB, which is great because then you can link to your Cosmos database. You can create new ones. You can run queries right inside VS Code with using your Mongo commands. It's just fascinating how much you can do now right from VS Code with these extensions. And there's one for storage. So you could deploy a static site that just came out last week. So you can right-click on your website and just say, hey, deploy this to Azure Storage. And, it'll run on a website.
So you got deployment to Azure in VS Code. You've got source control integration in VS Code. At some point, is VS Code going to be as big as Visual Studio?
Big in terms of size or users?
I don't mean users. I mean just in terms of, weight, heavy. I mean, the whole reason that we like VS Code is that it's lightweight and it doesn't have a lot of features.
Exactly.
You think that the feature creep is inevitable?
I don't think so. I think something they're very conscious of, and I'm downloading it right now, and it's 68 megs still.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
I guess the big thing here is that there's nothing in by default. You add all this yourself. If it's big and heavy, it's because you choose to add it.
Right.
A lot of these extensions, they're just tapping into the APIs that are available through the Azure Cloud to do this Node stuff with Azure specifically. The Docker stuff also does it in Docker Hub and a lot of Docker commands. So you need Docker locally, obviously, to do that.
It almost seems like a restart, of the Visual Studio experience from scratch, doing things right the first time and not having the backward compatibility albatross to worry about.
Yeah, I think it's about fulfilling the needs of different personas. Some people love what I call an IDE. They want everything just to be there and just to work and have a button that does it. And that's perfectly fine. I lived in that world for 15 plus years. It's the world you're living in, Carl, and it's just the one we're used to, right? So if it works, there's nothing wrong with that. And then there's people who are starting to go the other direction of, just pull it in as I need it. VS Code really just gives Microsoft a way to engage with that persona, which, let's be honest, a couple of years ago, I wasn't using any Microsoft products anymore because I was using, Atom and Sublime and Terminal and everything on a Mac, and there was nothing on Microsoft on a Mac.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose it's a really good way to do it as well because it means that you can start, it's kind of like the on by default thing, right? The off by default thing.
Yeah.
You can start with exactly what you need and build your experience up from there, which is great. You can't do that with Visual Studio right now. You have to go in and turn things off.
Yeah, and you remember, was it a couple of years ago, the Visual Studio team, might have been 4 or 5 years ago, they removed a bunch of buttons from the toolbar.
Yep.
I forget how long ago it was, but it was towards probably 2012-ish. I think they had something like 40 or 50 buttons in the toolbar, and they reduced it down to 19. And it was amazing how much easier it was to use at that point, at least when I looked at it. But just a different persona. Again, it's neither right nor wrong. It's just how to reach everybody.
Right.
Now, do you find you run different personas of VS Code yourself, depending on the project you're working on, different sets of extensions and so forth? Is there a sense of a template of a combination of tools for a particular job?
That's a great question. So yes, mostly. I have two different versions of VS Code in my machine. I have stable and insiders. And I used both of those, probably not for their intended purpose. I use insiders for my coding and for the kind of stuff I work with. But sometimes I use the stable version because you can put them side by side, and I set up the extensions in that one for when I go visit somebody or do a specific conference or a talk with a customer to show them more what would their setup look like. So it allows me on the same machine just to have two different personas to be able to work through things. And I share those out there too. There's a great extension called Settings Sync, which I forget the name of the gentleman who wrote it, so forgive me there, but Settings Sync is an amazing extension written by somebody in the community who it allows you to basically sync up all your settings, your extensions, your keyboard shortcuts, your preferences, your color schemes, everything. And then you can share those in a gist, basically. It looks at a gist ID, which makes it fascinating.
Yeah. And easy.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't gush enough about VS Code. I just think it's the best tool that's come out in the last 5 to 10 years by any company.
That's great.
But I think Carl's hit on this thing here, which is what if you had a chance to rethink it and you wanted to be cross-platform and you wanted to think cloud first? Like, there's so much of what's happened at Microsoft in the past few years that is trying to be cloud first. So what is .NET Core but a cloud first version of .NET? And VS Code is wearing very much that same mantle. Yeah,
I think it's great. And it takes a lot. I mean, it really... Do you remember when VS Code came out, how many people, and we were in that room together, Richard and Carl, when it was released and announced, how many people were just stunned that Microsoft would do something like this?
Yeah.
Right.
It really was amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's 4 years. Build 2014. And all those, it literally came too fast. It was about 3 hours of bang, 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 bang. Anders up there pushing the button to deploy Roslyn into GitHub, like all of those things at once.
Yeah. And at that point, it was little more than a code editor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The extensibility was not there at the release. And that was the biggest thing it got criticized for. And Eric Gamma and Chris Dias kept on saying, look, it's coming. But, we wanted to get the product out there and then kind of figure out what does an extensibility model look like by asking the community. So I think they did everything the right way. I really do.
John, you're so heavily into the web dev space. What's your view on Blazor?
I think Blazor is, it's great to wear when you go out to a light dinner with a casual pair of jeans.
Hey, I'm the funny guy on this show, dude.
Sorry. It's just too easy sometimes with these names that we have in technology.
Well, and let's face it, with your shoulders, man, you rock a blazer. It's true.
No, but seriously, I think it's great because it's really built on top of WebAssembly, right? And
right.
If you put it in a nutshell, what problem is this solving? It's solving, and I'm thinking WebAssembly in general, it's solving the ability to bring people who are experts at other languages beyond JavaScript and bring them to the web.
Right.
In a fast and performant way. And that's the promise of WebAssembly. So one of the people doing that, obviously, is the C# teams.
Yeah,
and that's through Blazor. So I think for people who have been doing C# for whether it's 1 year or 30 years, if that's your cup of tea and that's what you want to do, Blazor gives you an opportunity to do that.
Sure. But you're also seeing now Google's implementing a version to Go with WASM as well. Like, yeah, you are going to see other languages just available. Although, have you ever done view source on a Blazor page? It's weird to just see a group of DLLs being called. Like, I don't know how this better be for internal apps only because SEO ain't going to work.
Yeah, it's reminding me of the Silverlight days.
You're dang. I think we said that first, friend. I'm pretty sure we did after Sanderson showed that thing at NDC. Geez, 2 years ago now. We were just bug-eyed. That's the closest I've ever seen to David Fowler's head actually exploding.
And I think the one thing that's important to point out about Blazor is that, or WebAssembly in general, is I think it's easy to get caught up in the, we'll do that, we won't do JavaScript. Or no, JavaScript's going to win, there's not going to be WebAssembly.
Right.
There's plenty of room for all of this stuff to live.
Right.
Yeah.
I see no problem there at all. I think it's actually good for both sides.
Agreed.
Well, on the IT side, we're looking at this idea that the browser is the security profile for me as an IT guy to say, I allow this browser to run on this machine in these constraints. And now as an application developer, you could say, can you live in that container, essentially? This is sort of a one-size-fits-all smart client container. Between progressive web apps and WebAssembly, you should be able to do just about anything you need to do in the language of your choice.
Yeah, progressive web apps are amazing. PWAs, I love those. We should do a whole show on that someday. That's just
we've addressed it a few times. It's getting more interesting as I'm seeing. Once you see the Safari guys jump on board, then you can really, They are the recalcitrant ones, right? Like the Edge and Google go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then the Mozilla guys come and go, okay, we'll do this. But boy, once Apple finally caves on something and allows it to exist in Safari, this is going to be real.
Do they really have any incentive to innovate on Safari, though? I mean,
really
other than
don't.
Security reasons?
Well, they have announced earlier this year the intention to allow it. So this is the stuff that I think is the final, as you mentioned, Richard, it's the final straw to really make these things move forward.
Yeah. Because Apple really does not have strong incentive to do it. Which means when they do, it's because they're at the point where people are saying, then I cannot use Safari. Like I have said publicly, Safari is the new IE6.
Yep.
In the sense that it is popular and not compliant with standards.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the browsers seem to leapfrog who's the one leading versus who's the one kind of falling behind in features, and
Well, I feel like the Chrome team has been in the lead for a long time. The Edge team has done a good job playing ball and sort of keeping up, dealing with their own. So they got that restart, and it was kind of a big struggle for a while to get there. But Chrome's now got the problems that IE had.
Yep.
They're too big. They're too heavy. People pop open their task manager and see 70 copies of flipping Chrome running.
Yeah, what are you doing?
What's going on?
What are you doing?
Well, to me, the biggest inflection point in the browser was when most of the browsers went to that evergreen model where it's constantly updating for you, as opposed to the old model, which was you're stuck on IE6 for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So being evergreen, to me, is what changed the game and made this stuff even possible.
Well, and it's just, an ideal over on the run as side with large organizations that block that evergreen behavior because they are afraid. This is part of they have apps. They have IE6 dependent apps to this day, and they don't want them to break. Like the IE team served the enterprise and to this day still does. Like IE11 has every single interpreter except for IE6 for various reasons from 5.5 on, because that's the nature of the beast inside of some of these big enterprises. They have old apps that are important. Yeah,
you're running an ActiveX app and bam, you've got to be looking at one of those older browsers.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Like that's just sort of reality. And they're always behind firewalls and things. Like they are just not visible to the rest of the world. And they're not hiding it from an embarrassment perspective or anything. It's just like these guys run these apps for 10, 15, 20 years and they aren't being developed anymore, but they're still important to the organization.
Yeah.
So we've got to kind of have solutions to this stuff. But I don't know. I'm really excited where we are right now in terms of web development. It's just there's an awful lot of brown field to get there.
I think what you're really... and kind of wrapping up this whole discussion we're having, I think, is I try to tell my team and a lot of people I meet in the community and myself almost every day that I interact with folks, remind yourself that what you see is not indicative of the entire development landscape.
Yeah.
It's that bubble again. Because when you're at a conference, you're talking to people who are allowed to come to the conference, who wanted to come to the conference, or were made to. But they're the tip of the iceberg for the people who didn't come and weren't able to be there. And there's a lot of folks at these companies, not just large enterprises, but small companies too, don't get to go out or don't get on Twitter, don't get up on Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
So we have to keep that in mind that not everybody is trying to use the latest thing.
Mm-hmm.
John, before we let you go, I know we hinted and talked a little bit about Angular Mix that's going on in October, but can you talk a little bit about that and specifically some of the things that you're going to be doing?
Angular Mix is going to be fun. It's right around the corner for me, which I love. Thank you, Richard. Right here in Orlando. Universal Studios Orlando, and it's going to be fun. It's at a great location. It's right next to the park, so we can go into there. But what I like about this is it's kind of that mixture of enterprise meets Angular meets Node. And we've got some new speakers coming this year too. We've got the Dan Wallines of the world.
Well, at least one Dan Walline of the world.
Yes. Hey, and if you haven't met Dan or actually spoken to Dan or heard him speak, you have to. The guy is just a phenomenal presenter and a very good friend of mine. And what I like about this year too is we've got new speakers coming, And some of them that I'm excited about are people like Simona Koten, who works in my team. She's just amazing. Maxim Salnikov, who is like the PWA expert out there in the third-party world.
Awesome.
He's fantastic. And then Chloe Condren, which she's just, I don't know, I've learned about her over the last year or so, or speak at NG Atlanta and another conference, and was just really impressed by her speaking and the topics. So we've got some great people coming, and I'm excited to see Angular 7 should be out around that time. Kind of excited to see what comes out in that too.
Wow, and it couldn't be
Stephen
more
Fluen,
fun.
who I've got to have spent some little time with, is now the lead of dev relations for Angular, and the pace that those guys are putting new features and capabilities in Angular, like it's something. There's some of those abstracts that are marked TBD because we just don't know yet. We don't know everything that's going to be delivered by October.
Yeah, you know what my favorite new feature of Angular 6 was, which came out a couple months ago? It solves this problem.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm on Angular 2 and I want to get to Angular 6. How do I get there? They have a very simple instruction now where you can update using the CLI, and it will actually walk you through and in many cases just update your code.
Nice.
To make it work with the version compatibility. And I did 30 projects last night. It took me 3 hours of 30 projects to walk through it one at a time.
Wow.
And they all work.
It's not just about the language, it's about the tooling.
Yes. The tooling, and to be fair, Angular, Vue, and React, they all have really good CLI tools. And to me, I wouldn't use a front-end framework these days without a CLI.
Well, it just suddenly hits me. The conversation we just had over the hour is so much about the tooling around languages. It's a thing we deal with every day.
Things that make our lives easier.
I gotta read one more session from Angular Mix, because it even says at the beginning of the description it should be read in a deep theater guy voice. And it's Alyssa Nichols' talk. In a world where internet speeds can reach up to 6 megabits a second and cows reign supreme, one developer stands alone to discover the simplest way to cache everything. Join her on this epic journey fraught with lag and peril, where she'll battle config files and caching external assets, all the while dealing with the conflict of freshness versus cache-first styles, looming ominously over her every move. Will her love for cows be forever destroyed by a slow network? Or will she embrace the challenge and overcome the lag of the server worker power? Find out at the Angular Mix Talk, Service Workers and Cows, a love story.
Alyssa, when we reviewed those contents, Alyssa just nailed it with that abstract. We were just laughing.
Best.
It's awesome.
Brilliant stuff.
Indeed.
Well, you missed my favorite title session. A Boy, a Sugar Glider, and the TSA. Brian Clark.
Funny.
And I'm not even going to read I'm not going to read the description of it because I want you all to go to the website and check it out.
Yeah.
I've seen him give this session, and it's just, it's good. It's really good. It's all about security on the web. So I'll leave it at that.
Very good. All right, John, we'll see you in Orlando, and then hopefully in December too.
Yeah, guys. I hope to see you next time.
All right. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC.